In today's video, we're going to continue our NHL 2019 GM Report Card series, and we're taking a look at the work of General Manager of the Chicago Blackhawks, Stan Bowman, and that's coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey, and welcome back to the GM Report Card series. If you're new to this series and you haven't caught our other reports on other GMs around the NHL, I'll put a link up here in the YouTube cards. You can check out our other videos. We're still pretty early in this series, so there's plenty of teams that come here throughout the remainder of the offseason, so stay tuned for that. Now, Stan Bowman is going to be graded today on his work over the last season as well as the current offseason based on his trading record of signing players over that time frame, as well as his drafting record during the 2019 NHL Draft. Now, of course, as we know, when it comes to general managers, they have a big staff that helps them with this job. They have certainly guys that they rely on to help in a variety of ways, but ultimately they make the final decisions. They take the heat for the bad decisions. They often get the praise for the good decisions. Now, of course, one of the big decisions that Stan Bowman had to make during this past season was firing longtime head coach Joel Quenneville, who is one of the league's all-time great coaches when it comes to his record. He's helped that team to multiple Stanley Cups and certainly had a great track record throughout his time as a head coach in the NHL, but ultimately Stan felt it was time for a change, new direction, a new voice in the room, and many felt that really Stan Bowman and Quenneville never really completely saw eye to eye, and there was friction there over the last number of years leading to the dismissal. Obviously, Quenneville was hired prior to Stan Bowman becoming the GM, and sometimes it doesn't always work out, but obviously Quenneville was ultimately very successful there, and Bowman had to wait for the right time to make the change, but I guess time will tell, and we'll see if we ever find out more information about what was going on behind the scenes there. But ultimately, he brought in a young, inexperienced coach in Jeremy Colleton, which I know many people were kind of critical of in the beginning. But as the season went on, once things kind of got used to him being the head coach, it looks as though the team did kind of get things turned around. Of course, Quenneville's now the head coach down in Florida with his old boss from Chicago, Dale Talon. So we'll see how that works out for him. And so far, Colleton seems to be a decent option in Chicago. So we'll see how the future goes. But now let's jump in and take a look at his record of trades over the past season. Now we're going to kick things off with the last season here during the month of November when Stan Bowman made a very questionable trade at the time, but now the trade looks like it was a genius move in a way. He traded Nick Schmaltz to the Arizona Coyotes in exchange for Brendan Perlini and Dylan Strome. Of course, Dylan Strome was being looked upon as pretty much a draft bust after being taken so highly in his draft year behind Connor McDavid. Many thought he was going to turn out to be a superstar in Arizona, and things never really came to be. He had multiple opportunities, but never really got things going. Now many are thinking that a lot of it had to do with how Arizona helped with his development. Once he got to Chicago playing with his old junior teammate Alex DeBrincat, things really took off, and Dylan Strome was close to a point per game player, so it certainly worked out to be a potential trade steal here for Dylan Strome going to the Hawks. Nick Schmaltz ended up injured during the Arizona season as well, and well, hard to say how well that'll work out for the Coyotes, but I mean, Schmaltz is a good player, has a lot of potential. We'll see. Very well could turn out to be long-term a potential, trade that works for both teams, but right now it's looking like it's big time in Chicago's favor. Now, the following month, he made a trade with the Edmonton Oilers where he acquired Drake Caggiula and defenseman Jason Garrison, who was basically playing in the minors, writing out the final bit of his contract, where the Edmonton Oilers acquired Brendan Manning and Robin Narell. So obviously this was another decent move by the Hawks, getting another winger in Drake Caggiula, who certainly was inconsistent in Edmonton. We'll see if things work out better for him in Chicago. He's certainly probably going to have more opportunity to play with better players and see how things go from an offensive standpoint, but another decent move in my opinion. Later in January, he decided to trade Jan Reuter to the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for young defenseman Slater Cuckoo. So obviously a swapping of younger defensemen there. I'm not sure either side's going to get a major win on that trade front. We'll call that relatively even on both sides. And then that takes us to the current offseason, where we've seen a variety of moves here from Stan Bowman over this past summer, acquiring defenseman Olli Maatta from the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for forward Dominic Cahoon. Now, that deal, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of. Now, I know Olli Maatta had his time as a decent defenseman, really ever since recovering from a pretty serious injury. To me, he hasn't been quite the same defenseman. Now, I do acknowledge that with Stan Bowman, that blue line needs work, it needs help, and theoretically a few years ago, Maatta would have been a better choice, but giving up a promising forward in Dominic Cahoon, I'm just not sure that overall they're really further ahead. I mean, like I said, I know the blue line needs work. I'm just not sure that Maatta's the right guy for them, but I guess time will tell, and we'll see here if I'm correct or not. Now, they did swap a couple of forwards as well in a minor trade, bringing in John Quenneville from the New Jersey Devils in exchange for John Hayden. And then Then later on June 24th, they had a pretty decent-sized trade here with the Chicago Blackhawks where they acquired defenseman Calvin Dach and Alexi Sorella in exchange for goaltender Anton Forsberg and defenseman Gustav Forsling. So now Calvin Dach's a pretty solid defensive defenseman. I like that move for Chicago more so than the Mata trade. I think Dach will have more of a positive impact from the defensive standpoint. And of course, in Sorella's case, his brother was recently drafted by Chicago, so both of those guys are now in the Hawks organization. Not a significant, major trade here, but at the same time, for the Hawks at least, it creates another piece on the blue line that should help that blue line from a defensive standpoint. Of course, the Hurricanes had an abundance of defensemen and decided to move Calvin Dach after just one season. Now, later on June the 30th, they decided to bring back former Hawk Andrew Shaw, who had been traded to the Montreal Canadiens and is now traded back to Chicago, along with the 2021 7th-round pick. Going to Montreal was a 2020 second, a 2020 7th, and a 2021 third-round pick. So, of course, they swapped 7th-rounders. So, essentially, you're looking at a second and a third pick, really, for Andrew Shaw, which isn't too bad. I mean, he had a really solid year in Montreal last year with Chicago. He could likely, be a 18 to 20 goal scorer, provide that grit and, net front presence type of player. I mean, we all know how Shaw can be tough to play against. So, that should be an element that will help the Blackhawks, and obviously the player they're quite familiar with. So, overall, it helps Montreal because they were looking to free up some cap space. They were trying to go after Sebastian Aho, and they also had some other moves that they had to do. So, it kind of helped the Habs salary cap situation, and a decent move for Chicago as well. Now, on July the 9th, Stan Bowman and Jason Botterill hooked up for a trade with the Sabres here, and I'm not sure exactly why Stan Bowman made this move. He traded young promising defenseman Henry Yokoharu over to the Sabres in exchange for Alex Nylander. Now, I hope for Stan Bowman and the Hawks' sake that Nylander turns out to be Dylan Strome 2.0. But Alex Nylander has been in the system now for a number of years with the Buffalo Sabres, has yet to really find any kind of consistency in his game. He was a first-round selection back in 2016, kind of in a similar boat to Strome. Like, he's got a number of years now. He's been given multiple opportunities. There's been some question marks around his character, around his game, his effort level, all kinds of that stuff. So we'll certainly see. Now, I understand the Blackhawks had a lot of promising young defenders, and I guess between all of them that they figured Yokoharu might turn out to be more of a project, or just they didn't value him quite as highly as a few of the other ones that they have, so they decided he was expendable. I get that. I'm just not completely sold on the return, but we'll see if Alex Nylander can live up to the hype that he was drafted with. Only time will tell, but it worked well with Strome. We'll see if they can pull it off with Nylander. But for right now, I have to say I don't like the trade, but with the potential that could be proved wrong in the future. Then later on July 16th, they made a trade with Ottawa, trading forward Artemi Nisimov in his $4.5 million contract over to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Zach Smith, who's also making $3.25. So essentially, they're the exact same age. They actually wear the exact same number as well. And of course, they're traded for each other. Of course, in Ottawa's case, they get the bigger salary. They had all kinds of cap space. Zach Smith and Artemi Nisimov, probably both teams looking to find players a fresh start. Teams trying to find their player a fresh start, new beginning. Obviously, Zach Smith will play a little bit different style of game than a Nisimov. So for Chicago, he might very well play with a guy like Andrew Shaw, who, of course, they played against each other a long time in Montreal and Ottawa during their days in the Atlantic Division there. But obviously, Smith can provide that more physical element. He can be a fourth-line guy. He can be good on face-offs, play in the PK, etc. So a little different player than Nisimov, and it gives both guys a fresh start. I'm going to say it's a fairly neutral trade. I don't think either player is going to have a significant impact on either franchise, but I guess only time will tell. But so for the most part, I like the trades. Obviously, like I said, the one that I'm not really in favor of was the one with the Sabres for Nylander. Otherwise, I'm not overly fond of the Mata trade as well. But there's certainly some good ones in there so far, and we'll see if the Nylander can work out like the Strome trade. Now let's take a look at the contracts that he signed here over the last time frame as well. Obviously, heading into the beginning of last season, Stan Bowman signed many of their prospects to some entry-level deals, including guys like Mackenzie Entwistle, Nick Baudin, and as well as Philip Kurashev, Reese Johnson, etc. Chad Chris, another one coming from college hockey, signed in March as well. They did sign backup goaltender Colin Delia to a 3-year contract at $1 million. And of course, they have more than enough goalies right now, but a decent price for a third-string goaltender at this point. At the time, though, he was looked upon as being a number 2, an insurance policy should Corey Crawford not be able to play. So I guess things have changed a little bit in regards to their goaltending, but overall, not a bad signing at the time. Of course, they've then since signed a few other players, some RFAs, like Carl Dahlstrom signed a 2-year deal at $850. Jacob Nilsson. They signed Tim Soderlund an entry-level contract. Then they re-upped Slater Cuckoo for another year at $925. So fairly, for the most part, here's some pretty minor signings. After acquiring John Quenneville, they re-upped him for 2 years at $750. RFA forward Dylan Sakura got 2 years at $750. So nothing too significant. A lot of these younger players either getting signed to their ELCs or short-term RFA contracts. He did dip into the free agent market a little bit, bringing in Ryan Carpenter on a 3-year contract at $1 million per year. That's a decent signing. Carpenter can be a pretty good depth forward. Had been playing with the Sharks a bit. Got picked up by Vegas. And really proved to be a fairly important piece to their bottom six there as well. But with all the moves they've made, he became expendable. It made sense for him to look for opportunities elsewhere, especially with their cap situation. So Chicago was a decent landing spot for him. Of course, the big signing, though, in free agency was Robin Lehner, goaltender, for a 1-year deal at $5 million. That could prove to be extremely valuable. Obviously, with the health of Corey Crawford, it's certainly unpredictable in how things are going to go with his future. Having Lehner there, who could likely be the starter, obviously coming off a year where he won the Masterton Trophy as well as being a nominee for the Vezina. Robin Lehner certainly has the potential to be, even though he's an experienced goalie, the goalie of the immediate future at least, while they work on other plans here. But where he's only under contract for 1 year and will be a UFA next year, I guess we will see. But I think Robin Lehner's the type of guy, if things work well for him in Chicago, that he would probably prefer to stay. But I guess we'll see how things go between Crawford and Lehner. But it's certainly, no matter how you shake it here, their goaltending situation is much deeper with this signing. And I have a lot of faith in Lehner's ability. And of course, they also signed Kirby Dach, who they took on their first-round pick, to his entry-level deal as well, not long after the draft. Now, speaking of the draft, that's a good segue to jump over and take a look at the drafting record here of Stan Bowman during the 2019 selection. He used his first-round selection, and he was fortunate enough to win in the lottery, number 3 overall, on center iceman Kirby Dach of the Saskatoon Blades from the Western Hockey League. I do have a lot of faith in Dach's abilities, and he could prove to be a tremendous piece for this team down the road. I really thought they would go with Bowen Byram, even though they have a lot of other good, solid prospect defensemen. I'm not convinced that any of them are as good as Byram. I think Byram can jump into the NHL possibly as early as this year, and I think in a couple of years' time, once he gets some experience, could very well be a number 1 defenseman. So even though they already had some good-looking prospects in that area, I think he's going to turn out to be better than all of them, and that's really where I thought they would go. I'm certainly not going to mark against him for the Dach selection to give him a lower grade because of it, because I do think long-term he could be a very good selection. I think he's got a ton of potential. He's going to be a very high-end forward. I was a little bit surprised that they went in that direction when they had the opportunity to take the stud defenseman. Now, looking at the remainder of their picks, they took a variety of players with the other selections they had. In the second round, they took defenseman Alex Vlasic from the USHL. In the fourth round, they took forward Michael Tepley from the Czech Republic. In the other fourth round selection, as I mentioned, they took Antti Sarella, who's the brother of Alexei Sarella, who they acquired from Carolina. Then in the sixth round, they took a goaltender from the U.S., Dominic Basse. And then, of course, in the seventh round, they took another defenseman from the Western Hockey League, Cole Moberg. Overall, I think the Chicago Blackhawks, for the most part, have made a lot of decent moves. I think the Blackhawks were a team that were, extremely powerful, extremely strong, winning 3 Stanley Cups, had an incredibly successful group. Now they're going through a bit of a rebuild. Times have changed. Their veteran guys certainly bounced back strong last year. We saw tremendous efforts out of guys like Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. If they can continue to play even close to that level, and their younger players like DeBrincat and Strome can continue as well, obviously the team will be much more likely to have success. They've got a better goaltending tandem. They've made some upgrades to the blue line. So overall, I do see that the Blackhawks are improving. I do like the direction of the club. But in my opinion, Stan Bowman has made some questionable moves like we already discussed here, like the Mata trade as well as the Nylander trade. But at least I see the vision. I see the areas that he's addressing. So overall, I am going to give Stan Bowman a grade of a C+ for his moves here. Now, obviously that might seem harsh to some of you, but at the same time, like I said, the Mata trade, I have concerns about, as well as the Nylander trade. I think they might have given up some assets there in Cahoon and Yokoharu that might not really work out to their benefit and really help those other clubs more. So I guess let me know what you think of the work of Stan Bowman. I said for the most part, I like a lot of what he's done, but the things I don't like enough to bring his grade down to a C+. But I want to know what you think and how you'd grade his work here over the last season and current offseason. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. There's plenty more videos to come in this series as well, so stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.